My new apartment used to be a Santeria chapel. Before I had moved in, an older woman lived here and was known in my Dominican neighborhood of Brooklyn as a healer and spiritual guide. The man who lived downstairs told me that people would come and see her every day, bringing birds, chickens, mice, or lizards with them. My neighbor even told me he saw a goat once. The woman who used the animals for her practices. I stupidly asked my neighbor on what he meant by when he said that. He drew his finger across his neck, and just like that, rough stuff went on in there, man. When I saw the apartment, the woman's stuff was still there, and I was quietly furnished with lots of floral prints and the kind of kitschy, cheesy stuff you remember from your grandmother's house. There were also pictures of Virgin Mary everywhere, and behind a curtain in the living room there was a small room which led to the remains of her altar. It was covered in pictures of Jesus, photos of the woman's family, but also crude drawings of a man in black with black eyes and too many fingers on each end. All this stuff, the landlord assured me, would be out once the previous tenant's family comes to retrieve it. He also mentioned the apartment would be carefully cleaned and inspected before anyone else could move in. The woman, I learned later, had been hospitalized by her family, suffering from a nervous breakdown. My neighbor told me that later she would climb the stairs over and over again, whispering in Spanish that a demon was inside her brain. She lived in that apartment for so long that it was technically hers by New York law. The family hadn't wanted it and had it reverted to a little back to the current landlord for some of money. He was eager to get it off the market. I told him I couldn't afford the expensive place, and he said I could name my price, and I did. After surprisingly a little haggling, he agreed. The apartment's past didn't bother me. In fact, I was amused by it. It would be cool to tell the guests that the couch that it was sitting on was a spot where a witch had been summoned by the forces of darkness for her own unknown purposes, as an icebreaker. Once the apartment was certainly located not far from a cool, hip part of the city. I found myself going out a lot, meeting the people in the neighborhood, and getting sufficiently wasted, and since I didn't have to go far, it only took a month to get used to this stumbling home routine. One thing I've always done is my way of keeping myself awake and grounded, even when drunk, is by counting everything. It got to the point where I could predict the number of times I would tap the handrail on the train between the local subway stops. I could snap my fingers in precise amount of time before the crosswalk signal at my intersection changed. I would always count out loud the 41 steps it took to get from the front door of to my apartment, and home felt like home. I never felt creeped out in there. No spirits or demons bothered me. The only person who felt unnerved by the place was my friend Jen, who said that sitting on my couch felt like sitting on a cold, drafty room. When she came over, she stuck to the kitchen. And then a week or so ago, I was drunk and coming up the stairs when something immediately didn't feel right. I was struck by panic, something primal that seized my heart and made it beat faster. Because I was drunk and I was disoriented, and I didn't know right away what was wrong. The place was well lit. The door behind me had locked. I looked around to see if anyone was above, behind, or below me, but there was nobody there. I resumed walking up the stairs, counting out loud, when I realized that my counting was off somehow. These didn't feel like the right numbers for these steps, and it turns out I was right. When I got to my door, I counted 42 steps, not 41. Somehow I added this step in there. I'm not sure why it bothered me so much, but it did. It did so much. In fact, I went back downstairs to the front door and did it again. I counted every step, all the way up to my apartment, sobering up in the process. When I got to my door, I got the same thing again. 42 steps. I shrugged and went to bed. The next day, after I had gotten over my hangover, I tried again, and I got 42 again. I didn't understand it. I must have misstepped all those other times. Something about the way I was going up the stairs now had rediscovered it. I even had Jen come over to count the steps. She also came up with 42. She laughed at how perplexed and bothered I was by the whole thing. She made spooky noises and said the demon in my apartment was trying to fuck with me and go make me drive crazy, like the old lady. I told her that if it was haunted, they were going to have to pull out the big guns and get me out of a 2-bedroom apartment in New York City for less than $1,000 a month. Still, the discrepancy continued to weigh on my mind. I found myself counting everything, even when I wasn't drunk. How many seconds it took to ride the elevator at work, the time my different coworkers took for their lunch, the average amount of people on my train car coming home from work, and of course the steps up to my apartment. I'd never been on OCD before, but I found myself paying attention to everything, unable to distinguish between what was important and what was mundane. When something out of the ordinary happened, it jolted me, but not as much as the extra step in my staircase. Over a few days, though, it began to bother me less. I realized that Jen was right. I was overreacting. I probably wasn't the keenest observers while the free sheets to the wind, should I forget it, and I would have until tonight. Because I came up the stairs in my apartment, and as I reached my door, I was chilled to the bone, because I didn't get 42 steps this time. I got 44.
What's up, my pretties? It's the Lion Queen here. I want to appreciate you all for tuning into this video, and I do appreciate you guys supporting my video by giving this video likes and stuff. If you really enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like, comment and subscribe if you're new, ring the bell for notifications to when I upload so that way you guys will get updated for whenever I upload. If you want to follow me on Twitter or DeviantArt, feel free to leave a follow on those if you are interested in following me on those socials. If you want to support my backup channel, known as Miss Dark Shigo, feel free to subscribe to it, as a link to that will also be in the About page section. And with that being said, and that being the case, thank you so much for watching, my pretties, and as always, please stay pretty.